The cold came down hard off the ridgeline the night William Ackaffer found her. He'd been 3 days on the north face of the Varath Shelf, running recon on his own after Sergeant Holt caught a razor disc in the throat at the creek crossing. The ARF kit was designed for 2, but William had worked alone before. He knew how to move through enemy terrain without making noise, without casting shadows in the wrong places, without breathing too loud when a Drock patrol passed close enough that he could smell the oiled iron of their war hides. What he hadn't expected was the woodpile. It was stacked against the lee side of a burned-out granary, a structure the Drock had torched on their push through the Lowfield Valley 6 months ago. The stone walls still stood. Humans built their granaries to last. William had filed the ruin in his memory as a potential waypoint and marked it on his slate weeks ago during overflights. A point of reference, nothing more. He hadn't expected anything to be living inside it. But there she was. He almost stepped on her. He'd gone to ground behind the woodpile to glass the valley below, settling his weight slowly the way the ARF instructors had drilled into him until it was reflex heel first. Feel for dry branches, ease down, and his knee came to rest 6 inches from a hand. A very large hand. Gray-green in the moonlight, knuckled like river stones, fingers curled loosely around nothing. William went absolutely still. He didn't raise his weapon. That was the first interesting thing about William Ackaffer that the people who survived the war would later argue about, in bars and debriefs and the occasional memoir. His first instinct wasn't to shoot. His first instinct was to look. He looked. Was Orc. That much was immediately clear: the broad jaw, the upward curve of the lower canines, the thick orbital ridge above eyes that were closed. A Varath clan Orc from the coloring, which put her a long way from home. The Varath didn't range this far north in winter. She was wearing a traveling pack with the straps cut. Someone had cut them, not her. The cuts were too clean for her to have reached them herself, and her right side was dark and wet in a way that wasn't just the cold. She'd been hit. Something big by the spread of it. She was breathing, but the breathing was the labored, ragged kind that William had heard enough times to know it wouldn't last the night without help. He glassed the valley again, empty, checked his flanks, nothing moved. He thought about Holt. He thought about the 43 hours remaining in his recon window, and the route data he still hadn't gathered, and the fact that the Drock had at least one forward position somewhere between his current location and the relay beacon at Coldwater Ridge. He thought about the briefing where Major Fenn had said, very clearly, that the Varath clan Orcs had allied with the Drock hegemony in exchange for territorial concessions in the southern reaches. He thought about all of this in the space of about 4 seconds. Then he picked her up. She was heavy. Orcs always were. The bone density alone added 50 pounds over a human of the same frame, and she was a large Orc, close to 2 meters standing. William was not a small man, but he was not Orc-sized, and getting her inside the granary without dragging left marks. Marks got you killed, required the kind of problem-solving that his ARF training had mostly covered under the heading improvised load transport. He used his pack as a sled for the worst of it, and she didn't wake up, which he took as either a blessing or a sign that she was further gone than he thought. Inside, the granary was out of the wind. He propped her against the interior wall, assessed the wound, a crossbow bolt by the entry shape, but a Drock crossbow, which meant the head was barbed and laced with a slow coagulant, and made the decision that would define the next 6 months of his life in about 30 additional seconds. He'd have to remove the bolt. Not because she was an ally, not because the Varath-Orc alliance with the Drock was necessarily her personal choice or her personal war, not because he'd been trained to make tactical assessments about the intelligence value of wounded enemy-adjacent combatants, which he had been. He did it because she was going to die if he didn't, and William Ackaffer had a profoundly difficult time watching things die when he had the tools not to. His field kit had a bolt extractor. Most ARF troopers didn't carry one, too heavy, too specialized. But William had lost a man to a barbed bolt in his first deployment, and he'd carried the extractor ever since. He'd been made fun of for it, mildly, the way soldiers make fun of each other for things that don't fit the standard kit, and he'd accepted the ribbing with the equanimity of a man who knew exactly why he carried what he carried. He worked by feel and low red light, his hands moving through motions he'd practiced until they were automatic. She came awake when he got the barbs free. She came awake hard, a sound escaping her throat that was somewhere between a growl and a scream, her hand closing around his wrist with a force that would have broken it if she'd had more strength behind the grip. He didn't pull away. He held very still and spoke in a low, steady voice. "Easy," he said. "I'm taking it out, not putting it in. Try to stay with me." She looked at him. Her eyes were amber, very clear despite the pain, the kind of eyes that assessed a situation fast. He could see her calculating, human, ARF kit, alone, no raised weapon, hands bloody from her own wound, and he could almost see the moment she landed on confused rather than hostile. "You're not Drock," she said. Her galactic common was accented but precise. "No." "Why are you helping me?" "Because you'll die if I don't." He went back to work, packing the wound with his last field seal. "You can be angry about it later." She was quiet for a moment, then the bolt head. "Got it, hold still." She held still. Her name was Varaka. She told him that much before she lost consciousness again, and William filed it alongside the fact that she'd been alone, had come from the northeast, which was away from both the main Drock lines and the Varath clan territory, and had been shot in the back, which meant whoever had put the bolt in her had been behind her, which in this theater most likely meant Drock. People did not shoot their allies in the back, usually. He kept watch through the night with his back to the wall and his rifle across his knees, the unconscious orc woman beside him, the cold bleeding through the stone, the valley below him still and dark and empty of movement. He ate one of his 4 remaining ration blocks and thought about the route data, and thought about Holt, and thought about Major Fenn's briefing, and thought about the bolt in Varaka's back, and didn't sleep. Dawn came up slow and gray, the way it always did this far north in winter, the light arriving like an apology. She was still breathing. He checked the field seal, holding no seep, and gave her half his water. She woke mid-morning. He was at the granary's eastern window when he heard her shift, and he turned to find her watching him with those clear amber eyes, her hand not near the short blade at her belt, but not far from it either. "You're still here," she said. "Still here. Your window is the east face. The Drock patrol route swings wide of this position. You've been watching their dust." It wasn't a question. 2-man patrol passes at dawn and mid-afternoon, 18-minute interval at the far end of the swing. They're checking on something east of here. He paused. "You know what they're checking on." She was quiet. "You don't have to tell me," he said, "but you were shot with a Drock bolt from behind. You came from the northeast. You're a long way from Varath territory. These are the things I notice." "Your kind noticed too much," she said, but there was something almost like acknowledgement in it. "My kind gets killed when we don't." She shifted, testing the wound, and he watched her process the pain with the particular economy of someone who had been hurt before and had made a private arrangement with it. She looked at the field seal, at the extractor on the ground where he'd set it after cleaning it, at the bolt head beside it. "You carry a bolt extractor," she said. "I carry a lot of things people tell me I shouldn't." "Why?" He considered the question the way he considered most questions, thoroughly, without hurry. "Because the worst day is usually the day you needed the thing you left behind." She looked at him for a long time after that. He let her look. "The Drock are moving a breeding facility," she said finally, "northeast of here. 8 days ago I was inside their forward command at Thresk. I saw the manifests." A pause. "I was not supposed to see them. Hence the bolt. Hence the bolt." He turned back to the eastern window. The valley was still quiet, the patrol dust long settled. He thought about the breeding facility, what that meant, what the Drakh used them for, what the manifests would contain if they were the kind she'd seen. He thought about Major Fen and the relay beacon at Coldwater Ridge and the 40 hours remaining in his window. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Not yet. Tomorrow." She considered, possibly. "Then rest," he said. "We move tomorrow." "We," she said. The words sat in the air between them, like something he'd dropped. "You know where the facility is," he said. "I need to get that information to my command. My command needs to act on it before the Drakh finish the move. And someone just tried to kill you, which means you don't have a better option at the moment. I could kill you and take your kit." "You could try." He said it without edge. "But I pulled a barbed bolt out of you in the dark with my bare hands, and I've got the only water for 6 kilometers, so I think we skip that part." The silence stretched. Then, unexpectedly, she made a sound that might have been a laugh, low and rough, quickly suppressed, but there. "What is your name, human?" she asked. "William, ARF Trooper, 1st Recon, 7th Coalition." He paused. "William is fine." "Varaka," she said. He already knew. He didn't tell her that. "I know," he said. "You told me last night." "I don't remember last night. You were mostly gone. You said your name, told me to save my water, and called me a fool." "The fool part I stand by." "Fair enough." They spent the day in the granary in a silence that was not unfriendly. He watched the patrol routes, and she slept when she could and ate half a ration block with the expression of someone enduring a philosophical insult. Around mid-afternoon, she propped herself against the wall and watched him glass the valley and said, with the abruptness of someone changing the subject they've been turning over internally for hours, "The facility has 17 Orc captives, young ones." "Vareth clan." Another pause. "That's what was on the manifest. That's why I was in the command post." William lowered the glass. "Yours." "My sister's children." He looked at her. "They were taken in the Coldwater raid 4 months ago," she said. "The Varath elders made the alliance to get them back. The Drakh never delivered." Her jaw tightened, the muscles pulling against the deep bone structure of her face. "They never intended to." William had known that. The Coalition Intelligence Assessment had said as much 6 weeks ago, that the Drakh-Varath alliance was coercive, built on a hostage architecture that the Varath hadn't fully recognized until it was too late to back out cleanly. He'd read the assessment and moved on to the next briefing, because that was what you did with assessments that described situations you couldn't change. He looked at it differently now. "The facility," he said, "how guarded?" "When I saw the manifests, 2 strike teams, 40 Drakh soldiers." She paused. "But they were moving it. Moving reduces security during transit. There will be a window." "When?" 3 days, maybe 4. The transit route runs through the Keth Pass. She looked at him steadily. "I know the pass." "So do I." He'd mapped it from overflights. He knew the choke points, the sight lines, the places where the terrain funneled movement into predictable channels. He knew exactly where 2 people with the right information and the right equipment could make 40 soldiers' day considerably worse. He thought about the relay beacon and the route data and Major Fen and the things he was supposed to be doing. "My beacon's at Coldwater Ridge," he said. "I can have Coalition forces at the Keth Pass approach in 36 hours if the signal goes through clean." "Will they come?" He thought about that honestly. "If I tell them what you told me, yes." "You would trust a Coalition command with Orc children?" "I trust my command with the information and make very clear what outcome I'm requesting." He met her eyes. "There's a difference." She held his gaze. He had the sense of being measured against some internal standard he couldn't see, by criteria he didn't fully understand, and he waited without fidgeting, because fidgeting was something you learned not to do in ARF training when the thing measuring you might or might not decide to eat you. "All right, William," she said, We move tomorrow. They moved at first light. She was slower than she'd been healthy. He could tell by the way she held herself, slightly favoring the right side, the economy of motion of someone managing pain budget carefully. But she was faster than he'd expected, and she moved through terrain the way he'd only ever seen trained scouts move, placing her feet with an instinctive precision that spoke of years in the field. He matched her pace and said nothing about the blood that was slowly working through the field seal by mid-morning. They didn't talk much. ARF Recon had made William comfortable with operational silence, and Verica seemed to share the preference. What communication happened was tactical, a hand signal for halt, a chin lift toward a distant smear of Drock campfire smoke, a look exchanged when they found the patrol marker stones that indicated a new route extension since his last mapping. He noted the new markers on his slate. She watched him do it. "You map everything," she said. "Everything's useful eventually. You mapped the granary. Weeks ago, just as a waypoint." He paused. "Lucky." "Luck," she said, in the tone of someone examining the concept from the outside, "is what your kind calls patterns you haven't yet explained. Maybe, or maybe sometimes things are just lucky." He looked at her. "You could have been in a different woodpile." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I could have been." They made Coldwater Ridge by late afternoon, 2 hours ahead of the timing he'd planned, which he attributed mostly to Verica knowing a trail cut that wasn't on any coalition map, and which saved them 40 minutes of exposed valley floor. The relay beacon was where he'd cached it, in the hollow of a lightning-struck tree at the ridge's eastern edge. He pulled it out, checked the housing, and assembled the transmission package with the efficiency of someone who'd done it many times. "What will you tell them?" she asked. "The truth." He keyed the first authentication sequence. Facility location, estimated guard strength, transit window, route through Keth Pass, that I have a source with direct intelligence on the manifests and the route, that the facility contains Orc captives, Varath clan, juvenile. He looked up. That I'm requesting a strike team with a priority of non-combatant extraction. Non-combatant. The word moved through her mouth like she was tasting it. "That's what the children are. To you." "Yes." He finished the authentication sequence and began the message in code. "To me." He transmitted. The beacon lit and pulsed and went quiet. They settled in to wait for the response window, 45 minutes minimum, coalition relay protocols being what they were, and Verica leaned against the lightning-struck tree with the careful posture of someone not admitting how much they needed to rest. "Your command," she said after a while. "Do they know you are with a Varath Orc?" "They will when I send the follow-on details." "And the alliance with the Drock?" "I'll note that the alliance was coerced, and that my source has demonstrated active resistance to the Drock by being shot while stealing intelligence from their forward command." He paused. "Context matters." She looked at the valley below them, the long shadows of late afternoon turning the ridgelines blue-gray. "My people will not trust this easily." "I know. There has been a great deal of history." "I know that too." "You are remarkably unbothered by complexity," she said, with something that might have been dry admiration. "I'm bothered by it," he said. "I've just stopped expecting simplicity." He checked the beacon's receive indicator. "My sergeant used to say that the map and the ground are always different, and the job is to love both." "Your sergeant?" "Holt. He died 3 days ago." She looked at him. He was looking at the beacon. "I'm sorry," she said. "He was good at the job." William was quiet for a moment. "Better than me in most ways, terrible with the bolt extractor though, always left it behind." The beacon chimed. The response was better than he'd hoped and more complicated than he'd expected, which was usually how coalition command responses worked. Strike Team 9 was already operating in the Eastern Theater, 12 soldiers, heavy extraction capability, and could reach the Keth Pass approach in 28 hours if William could confirm the transit window. The complication was the political rider attached to the mission authorization. Any Varath clan individuals recovered were to be treated as protected non-combatants pending Alliance status review, and the Orc intelligence source was to be escorted to Coalition Forward Command for debrief. Debrief, in William's experience, was a word that covered a lot of territory. He told Varrica. She was quiet for longer than usual. The valley below had gone fully dark, the first stars burning through the clear cold air above the ridge. "They want me in a room," she said. "They want what you know, that's not nothing." He looked at her. "The children are the priority. A debrief means you're alive to give it. It means I'm in a coalition facility, with no exit I haven't been given." "For a while," he said. "Yes," he held her gaze. "I'll be there for what that's worth." "You are one soldier. I'm the one who pulled the bolt out." She looked at him for a long time. The wind came off the ridge and moved through the burned-out grass below them, and the stars got brighter. "My sister's name is Varath Kale," she said. "Her children are Sova and Dren. Sova is 12. Dren is 9. William took out his slate and wrote the names. "I'll put those in the mission parameters," he said, "specifically by name." Something shifted in her face. Not softness exactly. Varrica's face was not built for softness in the conventional sense, but something that recognized the weight of what he'd just done, which was take 2 children's names and put them into a military document, which meant they were real, which meant they had to be recovered, which meant someone was accountable for their recovery. "All right, William," she said for the second time. He transmitted the confirmation and the updated intelligence package, and the mission parameters, including 2 names in a field that usually held target designations, and then they cached what they didn't need and moved toward the Keth Pass in the dark. The Keth Pass was a 3-kilometer throat of rock and ice between 2 ridgelines, the kind of terrain that funneled everything through a single channel, and was therefore either extremely useful or extremely deadly, depending on which side of the choke point you occupied. Varrica knew it from the Orc side: the rock formations that provided cover, the ice patches that would break under certain loads, the echo patterns that carried sound in specific directions. William knew it from overflights and the kind of topographical obsession that had made him a good ARF scout and an annoying tent mate. Together they built a picture of the pass that neither of them had individually, the way 2 people sometimes build something better than either could alone. They reached the pass approach in the early hours before dawn and found their position on a narrow shelf 40 meters above the transit route. "Drock formation will be tight here," William said, tracing the channel on his slate. "No room to spread. If the captives are in the center column, they'll be shielded by the formation until the lead elements pass the second bend." "The ice shelf above the second bend," Varrica said. "What load does it hold?" He pulled up the survey data. 5 metric tons. 6 if the temperature drops overnight. The Drock use armored transports, 2 tons each, typically paired. Her eyes moved along the shelf line. "If the lead transport passes the bend, the formation will be committed. They can't backtrack, the pass walls are too close." She looked at him. "1 shot on the shelf, 1 shot. The fall blocks the front, the noise and chaos hold the rear." "And the center?" "The center has the captives." Her voice was entirely level. "The center stops. The center is exposed." He looked at the shelf, then at the math of what she was proposing. "Strike Team 9 needs to be in position at the pass exit, not the approach." "Yes." "I'll need to redirect them." "Yes." "That means we're on the shelf alone, until they come through from the exit side." "Yes," she paused, "unless you prefer not." He was already keying the updated positioning request to Strike Team 9. "I was just accounting for it," he said. "I'm not saying no." They waited out the remaining dark hours in the kind of professional silence that had become, over the course of 2 days, something that felt less like necessity and more like preference. William ate his last ration block and split it without asking, holding out the second half, and Verica took it without comment. The cold came down harder as the night deepened. He could feel her warmth through the shared contact of their position on the shelf, the simple thermodynamic fact of 2 bodies in a cold place, and he was aware of it the way you became aware of things that kept you alive. Dawn came again. The light arrived the same way it had the morning before, slow and apologetic. Strike Team 9 confirmed their repositioning at 3:40. 9 came through clean. And then at 6:12, the Drakh transit column entered the Keth Pass. It was larger than the intelligence had suggested. Not 40 soldiers, 60, maybe more, moving in the tight disciplined formations that the Drakh used when they were confident in their route. 2 armored transports, as Verica had predicted. A center column of moving forms that were too large for Drakh soldiers and too small for Drakh officers, moving with the particular gait of people who were not moving voluntarily. William pressed himself flat against the shelf and counted. Beside him, Verica was absolutely still. He could feel the stillness coming off her like cold from the ice beneath them. Not the stillness of someone suppressing movement, but the stillness of someone who had gone very deep inside themselves to a place where there was nothing but target and timing, and the line between those children and everything that stood between them and the exit of this pass. The lead transport reached the second bend. He felt her shift. He put his hand on her arm, not restraint a count, 3, 2, 1. The shot was a single crack that vanished into the echo of the pass walls, and the ice shelf above the second bend disappeared. The sound that followed was not one sound. It was a cascade, ice, rock, the grinding impact of a transport meeting 200 tons of sudden geology, the shearing screech of metal, the specific chaotic noise of a military formation that has just had its front removed from existence. The rear elements hit each other. The formation, as Verica had predicted, compressed toward the center and then stopped, jammed between what the front had become and the closeness of the pass walls. 60 soldiers suddenly reduced from a formation to a crowd. And through the exit end of the pass, Strike Team 9 came through. What followed was not a clean operation. It never was. There was shooting from the Drakh rear elements. A sustained and disciplined return fire that cost Strike Team 9 2 wounded and made the extraction longer and louder than the plan had specified. And there was a moment, 3 minutes into the firefight, when a Drakh officer with a heavy repeater had an angle on the center column and began to swing it around toward the captives. And Verica dropped 20 meters off the shelf onto the pass floor with the easy certainty of someone who had made the calculation and found the result acceptable, and she took the repeater apart with her hands. William came off the shelf after her, which was slower and less elegant, and involved a rope he'd prepped for exactly this eventuality, and still resulted in him landing badly on his left ankle and knowing it immediately. He didn't stop moving. The children were in the center column. 17 of them, as the manifest had said, in the Drakh-style restraint cuffs that were designed for human or orc wrists, and which William had the tools to open because he'd pulled the cuff key specs from the intelligence package, and cached a copy on his slate 6 days ago, when no one had told him to because he'd looked at the intelligence and thought about what it described and decided he might need them. He opened cuffs. Verica held the perimeter. Strike Team 9 pushed the rear elements back through the exit. The pass was a disaster of ice and rock and Drakh soldiers caught between the geometry of their own formation and the consequences of their own decisions. He found Sova and Dren in the second group, 12 and 9, the ages matched. They were scared and exhausted, and the 9-year-old had a cut above one eye that had mostly scabbed over, and they did not speak Galactic Common, and William did not speak Varathorc dialect, but Vareka appeared at his shoulder when he opened their cuffs and said something in a low voice that made them both go still, and then made Sova say something back. And then Vareka made a sound that he would only later recognize as the controlled release of 4 months of contained terror. A sound that no language needs words for. He stepped back and gave her 2 seconds. Then he gave her 1 more, because he could. Then we need to move. Yes, she said. They moved. The extraction took 11 more minutes and cost Strike Team 9 1 more wounded. A shoulder hit on a sergeant named Priya, who would later tell the story at least 40 times, and who would be uncharacteristically modest about her own role in it, and inexplicably generous about the ARF trooper with the bad ankle who'd opened every cuff in the column. William made it to the pass exit on the ankle through an act of will that he would later describe to his medical officer as manageable, which the medical officer would later write in his report as complete fibula fracture, patient mobile through sustained poor judgment. All 17 captives made it out. Vareka came out last, her hand on the back of Dren's neck in the way of someone who is both guiding and reassuring. The 9-year-old walking fast and not looking back because there was an adult hand telling him he didn't have to. William was sitting against the pass wall with his ankle held carefully when she came through. She looked at the ankle. How long has that been broken? Since the shelf. 22 minutes. Approximately. She sat down beside him with the careful movement of her wound management, and looked at the 17 Orc children being shepherded by Strike Team 9 toward the extraction landing zone, and said nothing for a while. Sova says thank you, she said finally. Tell her she's welcome. She says it to you, I'm just translating. A pause. Dren says nothing yet. He will when he decides it's safe. That's fair. He watched the 9-year-old walking with one hand gripping the coat of an ARF trooper he'd never met. Smart kid. He has his mother's caution. Something moved across her face. His mother will hear about today before the week is out. The Varath elders will hear about today. I just need them to hear about the debrief, William said. Yes, she turned to look at him. I will go to your coalition command, William, because you put 2 names in a military document, and you carry things that people tell you not to carry, and you pulled a bolt out of a stranger in the dark. She paused, and because the elders need to understand what the Drakh actually are. Good. They won't trust easily. I know. Neither should they. He shifted the ankle carefully. Trust is built the same way maps are, one confirmed point at a time. She was quiet. Then, your sergeant, the one who died. Hold. He taught you that, the map and the ground. He taught me most things worth knowing. William looked at the extraction LZ, the transports cycling in, the children moving toward the ramps. He also taught me to carry the extractor. He didn't carry one himself. No, he just carried the knowledge that I should. She stood up with effort, with the dignity of someone who had decided that effort was not something to be acknowledged. She held out her hand. Large, gray-green, knuckled like river stones, the same hand he'd almost stepped on in the dark. He took it and let her pull him up. You'll need a carry team for that ankle, she said. I'll manage. You always say that. So far it's been true. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him that first morning in the granary, the calculation, the assessment, the landing point of confused rather than hostile, and then she said, Come, I will tell you the fastest route to the LZ, and you will map it, and we will both pretend you don't need the shoulder. I don't need the shoulder. Then give it to me, she said. I have a wound and a pride and a very long debriefing ahead of me. I'll take what's offered. He thought about that, then he offered the shoulder. They went down together, the tall Orc woman and the ARF trooper, the fast route toward the transports and the children and the long, complicated future that started with a name on a manifest and ended, improbably, here, at the exit of a mountain pass in winter, in the first good light of morning. She'd been sleeping in the woodpile. He'd brought her inside before dawn. Everything else was consequences. The debrief lasted 11 days. William spent the first 3 of them in medical, where the fibula fracture was addressed with the professional disapproval of the coalition's medical staff towards soldiers who walked on broken bones for 22 minutes, and where he gave his mission report in 3 parts, lying in a cot, while a recording officer made notes and occasionally stopped to confirm details that seemed unlikely and were confirmed anyway. The Varath clan elders arrived on the 4th day. Not because the coalition had summoned them. They hadn't, but because Sova and Dren had arrived, and because Varika's first message out of coalition custody had been to her sister, and because 17 Orc children who had been held in a Drock facility for 4 months had a great deal to tell their families about what those months had looked like and what the Drock's intentions had been. William was not in the room for those conversations. He was a human soldier in a coalition medical bay, which was not where those conversations happened. But he heard about them, the way you heard about things in military facilities, in fragments, through doors, from Strike Team 9's Sergeant Priya, whose shoulder was healing 2 bays over and who turned out to have very functional hearing. The Varath Clan Council sent a representative to the coalition command on day 6. She was not a diplomat in any formal sense. She was an elder named Kethvara who wore travel-worn gear and had the same amber eyes as Varika, and who sat across from Coalition Major Fenn for 4 hours, and reportedly spent 2 of those hours explaining in considerable detail exactly what the Drock had done, and exactly why the Varath Alliance had never been willing, and exactly what the Drock's breeding program had been designed to produce. Major Fenn, who was not a diplomat either but was an extremely good analyst, sent the transcript up the coalition chain within an hour of the meeting's end. On day 8, Varika came to the medical bay. She moved with less pain than before, the field seal replaced by a proper coalition wound closure, and she walked to his bedside with the unhurried self-possession of someone who had decided to be somewhere and was being there. "The debrief is done," she said. "Good. Your command has the facility locations, the breeding program architecture, the Drock supply chain through the Eastern Pass network, and a list of 17 officers who authorized the captive transport." She sat down in the chair beside his cot, uninvited and with complete authority. "Your Major Fenn is a useful person." "I've always thought so." She thinks so too, which is either confidence or accurate self-assessment. Usually both. Varika looked at his ankle, now properly splinted and wrapped. "How long until it carries weight?" "Week or so, maybe less if I'm careful." "You won't be careful." "I'll be careful enough." She looked at him in the particular way she had, assessment and something behind it, and said, "The Council has requested that a Varath clan representative be attached to Coalition Eastern Theater Command, an observer formally, informally, intelligence coordination on Drock movements through Orc territory." That's a significant shift. The Drock broke the alliance the day they took those children. The Council simply needed to see the documentation to say so officially. She paused, and to understand that not all humans lead with a weapon. He didn't say anything to that. "Kethvara has named me as the representative," she said. "I will need a counterpart, someone who understands that intelligence is built from confirmed points, someone who carries tools that people tell him not to carry." Her eyes met his. "Someone who knows the Keth Pass and the Coldwater Ridge approach and the patrol routes on the north face of the Varath Shelf." "You're proposing a liaison assignment." "I'm proposing the obvious next step," she said. "The Drock have 3 more facilities we haven't located yet. The Eastern Pass network is mapped on their side and not on ours, and I know things about the terrain that are not in your coalition surveys. Because you know trails that aren't on any coalition map. Among other things," she looked at the window, the gray winter light coming through it, You put two names in a military document. I am proposing you put them in several more. He thought about Holt. He thought about the map in the ground, always different, the job being to love both. I'll need to be cleared for walking first, he said. Naturally. And you'll have to stop calling me a fool. I made no such promise, she stood. I said I stood by it. I didn't say I'd repeat it. She moved toward the door with the easy economy of her movement, the same motion he'd tracked through 2 days of difficult terrain and one mountain pass firefight. At the door she stopped. Sova asked me to give you something. She set a small object on the table beside his cot without ceremony, a woven cord in Varath clan colors, the kind that Orc children made and gave to people they considered worth the giving. She made it during the transit. She wanted you to have it. He looked at the cord, at the careful knotwork, the colors that meant something in a language he didn't speak. What do they mean? He asked. The colors. The gold is for debt acknowledged, Varaka said. The green is for the pass of danger survived. The black is for the person who knows where you are in the dark. She left. He picked up the cord and turned it over in his hands. The knotwork was good, even, tight, made by someone who'd had time and had used it carefully. He looked at the window and the gray light and thought about wood piles and the dark and what it meant to know where someone was. He tied the cord around his wrist. 2 weeks later, cleared for walking and formally assigned to Coalition Varath Liaison Intelligence Group as its founding human member, ARF Trooper First Class William Acaffer limped into his first joint briefing and found Varaka already there, standing at the map table with a stylus and the kind of expression of someone who has arrived early on purpose. You're late, she said. I'm exactly on time. I've been here for 10 minutes. That makes you early, he said and sat down and uncapped his own stylus. Not me late. She looked at him with the amber eyes and the assessment and the thing behind the assessment. Then she turned back to the map. The first facility, she said, is here. She marked a point in the Varath Highlands, in terrain he knew from altitude and she knew from ground. The Drakh have been moving their logistics through this corridor, which is why the Eastern Patrol routes extended. They're running supply chains under our coverage. Show me the cutoff points, he said. She showed him. He mapped. Outside the briefing window, the Varath Highlands were white with new snow. The passes closed to all but the most determined travelers, the ridgelines cutting sharp lines against a sky that was, for once, clear and blue and wide open. Somewhere in the valley below, 17 Orc children were beginning the long process of learning that the world was sometimes not what it had arranged itself to appear to be. Somewhere behind them, the Drakh were recalculating. And in a Coalition Forward Command briefing room, 2 people who had met over a woodpile in the dark were building a map of everything the other one didn't know, one confirmed point at a time, the way all lasting things are built, not in the light, not in the easy moments, but in the cold before dawn, when the choice to bring someone inside is still a choice, and still costs something, and still means everything. William adjusted the cord on his wrist. He mapped. The Varath Clan Council formally withdrew from the Drakh Hegemony Alliance 12 days after Kethvara's meeting with Major Fen. The withdrawal was not announced. It didn't need to be. The Drakh knew what it meant when a Varath clan elder walked into a Coalition Forward Command and sat down for 4 hours, and they responded the way they always responded to information they didn't like, by doing something, quickly, in the wrong direction. The wrong direction in this case was the Coldwater Valley. William heard about it before the official intelligence summary crossed his desk, because Varaka had a communication network among the Varath clan scouts that moved information faster than Coalition signals protocols and involved neither encryption keys nor authentication delays. She appeared in the briefing room doorway at 3:40 while he was still working, 3 weeks into the liaison assignment, and said with the brevity of someone who'd been running, They're moving on the valley farms. 3 strike columns approaching from the northeast. 3 hours, maybe 4. He was on the comms in 30 seconds. The response coordination over the next 2 hours was the thing that the after-action review would later describe, in the dry language of military documentation, as an unprecedented integration of coalition ARF assets and Varath clan intelligence capabilities, producing outcomes exceeding standard engagement projections. What it actually looked like was William on one side of a map, and Verica on the other side, and both of them moving faster than they had individually, because each one carried the knowledge that the other one didn't have, and neither one wasted time being surprised by that. The Drakh columns reached the valley approach to find coalition strike teams already in position at the 3 choke points that Verica had identified as unavoidable for a northeastern approach, because those choke points were in the Varath clan trail network, and not on any coalition survey, and William had mapped them all in the 3 weeks since the Keth Pass operation. The columns stopped. Not in defeat, the Drakh were not easily turned, but in recalculation. They had expected to move through an undefended valley. They had found a defended valley. They would calculate the cost. While they calculated, the valley farms had time to evacuate. William watched the dust clouds of the columns withdrawing from the ridge where he'd taken up his observation post, and thought about the map in the ground, and thought about Holt, and thought about a woodpile in the dark before dawn. There was a sound behind him. He didn't turn. "They'll come back," Verica said. "Yes. With better intelligence on the trail network." "Probably." He lowered the glass. "So we'll need better intelligence on their intelligence." She came up beside him and looked at the withdrawing dust. "I know someone in the Drakh-adjacent trading network," she said. "A person who moves goods through the eastern passes, not loyal to anyone in particular." "Loyal to what pays?" "That's useful. It will require going back into the Eastern Theater." "I know the terrain." "Your ankle." "My ankle is fine." "You said that last time, and it was a fracture." "Last time it was fine enough to get the job done." He looked at her. "Which is what fine means." She made the sound that might have been a laugh, the same sound he'd heard in the granary, the one she suppressed quickly. Then she was quiet for a moment, looking at the valley. "Kethvara wants to assign 3 Varath scouts to the liaison group," she said. "Young ones, good in the field. She says it should not be just the 2 of us carrying this." "She's right. She usually is." Verica turned from the valley. "She also says to tell you that the Varath clan owes a debt that the cord on your wrist only begins to represent." He looked at the cord. The gold for debt acknowledged, the green for danger survived, the black for the person who knows where you are in the dark. He'd worn it every day since Sova had made it in the transit vehicle, in the space between captivity and freedom, with her hands and whatever cord she'd had, and the very particular determination of a 12-year-old Orc girl who had decided someone was worth the giving. "Tell Kethvara the debt is settled," he said. "We're working on what comes next." Verica looked at him with the amber eyes and the assessment and the thing behind the assessment that he had learned over weeks to recognize as something he didn't have a word for yet in any language he knew. Then she said, "The debt is never settled, William, not the real kind." She turned toward the ridge trail. "That's not how it works." He followed her down. The 3 Varath scouts arrived the next morning. They were young, as Kethvara had said, and good in the field, as she had also said, and deeply skeptical of the human ARF trooper with the slate full of topographic maps and the woven cord on his wrist, as anyone with sense would have been. William made no attempt to argue them out of the skepticism. He showed them the maps instead, and asked questions about the trails they knew that he didn't, and wrote down the answers, and let the record speak. By the end of the first day, the youngest one, a scout named Vethra who was 17, and had the same amber eyes and the same instinct for watching that seemed to be a Varath clan characteristic, had looked at his slate for a long time and then said, in careful galactic common, "You have mapped every route we use. How?" "You showed me the ones near the Keth Pass," William said. "I extrapolated from the terrain logic." "That is not how map-making works." "That's how this kind works." He looked at the slate, "but I was wrong about 3 of them. The one at the northwest fork assumes a drainage pattern that doesn't hold in the spring thaw. And the second trail above the old Vareth waypost, that one's not a trail, it's a seasonal streambed. I marked it wrong." Vethra looked at the slate for another long moment. Then she corrected all 3, efficiently, with the particular confidence of someone who has walked the ground. He updated the map. "Better," he said. "Yes," she said, and didn't say anything else, but the skepticism had shifted into something more like evaluation, which was its own kind of progress. The Eastern Theater campaign that followed over the next 4 months was not clean or easy or quick. It was the kind of war that got won in increments. A facility location that led to a strike, a supply route disrupted that led to a second facility, a contact in the Eastern trading network that Varrica knew who led to a documents cache that named 3 more Drock officers who had run the captive program. William's slate got fuller. Varrica's contacts got more willing to talk, because word moved in the Vareth clan network that the human liaison could be trusted, and his maps were accurate, and when he put names in military documents those names meant something. The 3 facilities were found. The captive programs were dismantled. The Drock Eastern Command spent considerable resources trying to understand how their logistics corridor had been so effectively mapped, and kept adjusting their routes to find new ones already compromised, which was a problem without an obvious solution when the people doing the mapping knew the ground from both sides. Major Fenn, in the 5th-month review, described the Varath Coalition Liaison Intelligence Group as the single most effective intelligence fusion asset in the Eastern Theater. She described it in writing, in a formal report, which went up the coalition chain and came back with commendations attached. William read the commendations and thought they'd used too many words. Varrica read them and said, "They called you resourceful. It means they're not sure what category I go in. You go in the category of person who carries a bolt extractor. That's a small category. The best ones are," she set down the report. "Sova sent another cord." He looked up. She held it out, a second woven bracelet, this one with more colors than the first, the knot work more complex, the work of someone who'd had 4 months to get better at it. "What do the new colors mean?" he asked. "The blue is for trust built," she said. "The red is for the enemy turned aside. The white is for the door opened." He looked at the cord. "She made this for me." "She made one for each of us," Varrica said. "Mine is on my wrist, yours is in your hand." She paused. "She says the white is because you opened the cuffs in the pass, but I think she means something else by it as well." He looked at Varrica. She looked back at him with the amber eyes and the calculation and the thing behind it that he had spent 4 months not naming, because some things moved better when you let them find their own pace. "The door opened," he said. "Yes." "For what?" She held his gaze and said, "That is what she left for you to decide." Outside the briefing window, the Vareth Highlands were thawing, the snow pulling back from the south-facing slopes, the passes opening up. In the valley, the farms that had evacuated were being resettled. In the Eastern Theater, the Drock were recalculating for the 4th time in 4 months and finding, each time, that the ground had moved under their feet while they were looking at their own maps. William tied the second cord alongside the first. Blue for trust built, red for the enemy turned aside, white for the door opened. He looked at them on his wrist and thought about the worst day being the day you needed the thing you left behind, and thought about how the inverse was also true, that sometimes the thing you carried without knowing why turned out to be exactly what the moment required. He picked up his slate. "Vethra found a new trail in the northwest," he said. "Show me where she marked it." Varaka leaned across the map table and pointed, and they built the next confirmed point together, the way they had learned to, one correction at a time, one trail at a time, one door at a time, against an enemy who had never understood that the most dangerous thing in any theater of war was not the weapon you could see coming, but the two people in a room who each knew half of everything and had decided to tell the other one. The map grew. Outside, the thaw moved north. The Drakh, far to the east, began to understand that something had changed, not in a battle they'd lost, not in a facility they'd had taken, but in something quieter and more permanent, the kind of change that happens when people decide to trust each other and the decision holds. They didn't have a word for it. William did. He'd learned it from Holt, who'd learned it from the ground, who'd had it longer than any of them. He mapped